Barry barely had time to grab the second trash bag before the deadbolt clicked behind her. "Don't bother knocking," her father Thomas said through the closed front door. "You missed this month's rent. You don't live here anymore." Barry stared at the familiar blue front door, the one she had walked through nearly every day since she was 6 years old. "Dad, please, my paycheck clears on Monday. I've never skipped a payment." "You should have planned better," her mother, Linda, answered from inside. "Real landlords don't wait because someone has excuses." A curtain shifted in the front window. Her younger brother, Ethan, stepped into view wearing a smug grin. "Have fun starting from scratch," he called. "Maybe now you'll figure out how expensive the real world is." Several neighbors had already slowed their yard work. An older couple across the street exchanged uncomfortable glances while Linda deliberately raised her voice. "We tried everything," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Some people just refuse to take responsibility." Barry felt every pair of eyes settle on her, as if she were exactly what her parents claimed, a grown daughter who had freeloaded until she was finally thrown out. She looked down at the 2 trash bags, containing everything she'd been allowed to keep. Then she quietly picked them up, walked to her aging sedan, and drove away without saying another word. She thought she'd just lost her home. She had no idea she'd just been forced out of the only house that had legally belonged to her for years. The weekend before Thanksgiving had always been Barry's favorite time of year. Her grandmother used to spend those mornings baking pies while humming old songs that no one else remembered. Even after she passed away 6 years earlier, Barry still caught herself expecting to smell cinnamon whenever she walked through the kitchen. Instead, every Thanksgiving since then had become another reminder that things had changed. After Grandma died, Linda and Thomas insisted they would take over the house until everything settled. Barry never questioned it. She was 23, grieving, and trusted her parents completely. When they told her she would need to start paying rent if she wanted to keep living there after college, she agreed without argument. "You're an adult now," Thomas had told her. "Nothing in life is free." It sounded reasonable. When the roof leaked, they told Barry responsible tenants helped cover repairs. When the furnace failed, they said everyone had to contribute. When property taxes increased, Linda explained that homeowners couldn't shoulder every expense alone, even though Barry wasn't supposedly the homeowner. Every month Barry transferred, rent on the first. Every unexpected repair came from her savings. Every overtime shift she accepted at work disappeared into what she believed was simply the cost of staying in the family home. She never realized she was paying thousands of dollars to remain inside a house that was already hers. Hours after being thrown out, Barry parked outside a small motel she couldn't afford. As she searched through the last box she'd rescued from her bedroom, something slid from beneath a stack of old photographs. It was a cream-colored envelope. Her grandmother's handwriting covered the front. "For Barry, only if you ever have nowhere else to turn." Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside rested a small brass safe deposit key. Folded beside it was a single card with the name of a local credit union. Nothing else. No explanation. No letter. Just the key. The next morning, with barely enough money left for another night's stay, Barry walked into the quiet credit union, hoping her grandmother had simply left behind a forgotten savings account. The branch manager politely accepted the key, disappeared into the vault, and returned carrying a slim file. He unlocked it, opened the first page, and stopped reading. His expression changed so suddenly that Barry's stomach tightened. He looked from the paperwork to her face, then quietly closed the folder. "Ma'am." He gestured toward a private office. "I think you should take a seat." Barry followed the branch manager into the small office at the back of the credit union. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. He closed the door gently behind them, set the file on the desk, and folded his hands before speaking. "I want to be very careful here," he said. I can't give you legal advice, but before we go any further, may I ask you something? Barry nodded. Do your parents own the house listed at 418 Willow Lane? She frowned. Of course they do. He tilted his head slightly. You're certain? My grandmother lived there until she passed away. After that, my parents handled everything. They let me stay there after college, but... She gave a nervous laugh. They said if I wanted to live there as an adult, I'd have to pay rent. The manager didn't smile. Instead, he slowly opened the file and turned it toward her. I think you should read the first page. Barry leaned forward. At the top was the county seal. Beneath it was a property description. Her eyes drifted lower until they reached the owner's name. Barry Elise Carter. She blinked, then blinked again. No. She looked back at the manager. This can't be right. He calmly pointed to several official stamps. The deed was recorded 6 years ago. Barry's pulse quickened. There has to be some mistake. I verified the recording number before bringing this file in. She stared at the document again. The address. The parcel number. Her grandmother's signature. Everything matched the home she had just been thrown out of. I don't understand. The manager carefully slid another page toward her. This is the transfer document your grandmother executed shortly before her passing. Barry read only a few lines before her vision blurred. Her grandmother had transferred full ownership of the property directly to Barry. Not to Linda. Not to Thomas. To Barry. Her hands began shaking. I've been paying rent there. The manager looked at her sympathetically, but said nothing. Memories came rushing back with painful clarity. Her father standing beside the mailbox. The roof needs replacing. Responsible tenants help with repairs. Her mother handing her utility statements. You use the house too. You can contribute. The furnace breaking during winter. Thomas looking disappointed. If you expect us to carry everything ourselves, maybe you're not ready to live here. Barry remembered emptying nearly every emergency fund. She had to cover those expenses. She remembered taking weekend overtime because another unexpected house bill always appeared. She remembered apologizing whenever she struggled to keep up. I'm sorry, she'd whispered countless times. I'll pay the rest next Friday. Every apology suddenly felt unbearable. She had never been behind on rent. She had been paying money to people who had no legal right to collect it. No. She covered her mouth. They wouldn't do that. Her grandmother's handwriting caught her attention. Attached to the deed was a notarized letter. Barry unfolded it carefully. My dearest Barry asterisk. If you are reading this, something has gone wrong. I chose not to tell you immediately because I feared someone might pressure you before you were ready. This house belongs to you because I know you will protect it, not because it is valuable, but because it is home. If anyone ever tells you otherwise, trust these papers, not their words. A tear landed on the page. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice. Every holiday, every birthday, every warm hug, every promise that Barry would always have a place where she belonged. Someone had hidden all of it from her. She slowly looked back at the manager. Why would they keep this from me? I don't know. He paused before adding quietly. But your grandmother clearly believed there was a possibility someone would. Barry leaned back in the chair, struggling to steady her breathing. For 6 years, she had believed she owed her parents gratitude. Now every memory carried a different meaning. The rent, the repairs, the guilt, the threats, even being thrown out. None of it had happened because they owned the house. It had happened because they needed her to believe they did. Just as she began gathering the papers, the branch manager hesitated. There is something else. Barry looked up. He reached beneath the deed packet and lifted a second folder that had been stored beneath the first. It was noticeably thicker. I almost missed this because it was filed separately. He rested it on the desk between them. The contents appear to relate to the property's financial history. Barry stared at the unopened folder. What kind of financial history? The manager met her eyes. I think. He gently pushed it toward her. You're only seeing half of the story. The second folder was thicker than the first. Barry slowly opened it, expecting old tax records or insurance papers. Instead, neatly organized statements filled the file. The branch manager adjusted his glasses. Take your time. The first page showed the property's annual tax bill. Barry's eyes moved down to the payment history. The account that paid it looked familiar. Too familiar. She froze. That's... She pulled out her phone, opened her banking app, and compared the last 4 digits. It was her checking account. Her voice barely came out. I've been paying the property taxes. She turned another page. Homeowner's insurance. Paid. Again, the payment came from her account. Another page. A plumbing contractor. Another. Roof replacement. Another. Furnace installation. Every major expense for the house over the past 6 years had been paid directly from Barry's own bank account through automatic withdrawals she had authorized after her father repeatedly insisted they were shared household responsibilities. Her parents hadn't been supporting the house. She had. And on top of that, every month there was another transfer. Monthly rent. Transferred into Thomas Carter's personal account. Barry leaned back in disbelief. I paid for the house. She looked down at the rent transfers. And I paid them to let me live in it. The branch manager quietly nodded. I would recommend making certified copies of everything immediately. I am. And I strongly suggest speaking with a real estate attorney before confronting anyone. Barry looked up. I'm not confronting them. The manager raised an eyebrow. Not yet. Thanksgiving afternoon arrived with a knot in Barry's stomach. She almost didn't go. Her Aunt Carol had called the evening before. I don't know exactly what happened, Carol had said gently, but family shouldn't spend Thanksgiving alone. Barry accepted. Not because she expected support, because she knew exactly what story everyone had already heard. As she walked into Carol's dining room, conversation slowed. Several relatives offered awkward smiles. Others avoided eye contact. Then Linda stood from the dining table. There she is. Her tone sounded almost sympathetic. I was wondering whether you'd come. Thomas sighed dramatically. We didn't want things to end this way. Barry remained standing. Neither of them asked whether she had somewhere to sleep. Instead, Linda addressed the room. You all know we've tried helping Barry for years. Several relatives nodded. Thomas folded his arms. She lived under our roof as an adult. We only asked her to contribute. Ethan laughed from across the room. Contribute? She practically expected free housing. A few cousins chuckled uncomfortably. Barry noticed the expressions around the table. Pity. Disappointment. Judgment. Exactly what her parents wanted. Her aunt quietly asked, Barry, is any of this true? Barry didn't answer immediately. Instead, she placed a large envelope on the dining table. Thomas frowned. What's that supposed to be? Barry calmly removed several certified copies from inside. I went to the credit union yesterday. Linda's face tightened almost imperceptibly. Barry slid the deed across the table. I think everyone should read this. Silence filled the room. Her uncle picked up the first page. His eyes widened. He looked again, then toward Thomas. Tom. He slowly turned the document so others could see. It says Barry owns the house. The room erupted. What? That can't be right. Let me see. One by one, relatives leaned closer. Every document listed the same owner. Barry Elise Carter. Linda immediately stepped forward. Those papers aren't real. They're certified county records, Barry answered calmly. Thomas slammed his hand onto the table. You forged them. Barry met his stare. No. Ethan scoffed. So now you're making fake deeds. Barry quietly reached into the envelope again. I thought you might say that. She placed another stack beside the first. Bank statements. Property tax receipts. Insurance payments. Invoices for roof repairs. Furnace replacement. Emergency plumbing. Every payment highlighted. Every withdrawal traced. Every account bearing Barry's name. A stunned silence settled over the dining room. Her cousin whispered, Barry paid all of this. Her aunt looked from one document to another. And she was paying rent too. Barry nodded. Every month. Someone across the table slowly said, So. They looked directly at Thomas. You charged your own daughter rent. To live in the house she owned. No one spoke. Linda's confident expression cracked. Thomas finally broke the silence. You don't know the full story. Barry looked directly at him. Then tell it. Instead, he looked around the room. His face reddened. This isn't anyone else's business. Barry carefully gathered only the original certified copies, leaving duplicates for everyone else to continue reading. I've already hired a real estate attorney. Thomas's chair scraped violently across the floor as he stood. You'll regret turning family into a legal matter. Without raising her voice, Barry answered. No. She looked him straight in the eyes. You turned my home into one. The room fell completely silent. No one tried to stop her as she walked toward the front door. Behind her, relatives continued turning pages. Questions began replacing accusations. For the first time in 6 years, her parents no longer controlled the story. The Monday after Thanksgiving, Barry sat across from her attorney in a conference room overlooking downtown. Attorney Melissa Grant closed the thick property file and folded her hands. I've reviewed everything. Barry searched her face. And Melissa gave a firm nod. The ownership chain is clean. Barry let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. No problems. None. Melissa turned the recorded deed toward her. Your grandmother transferred the property directly to you 6 years ago. The deed was properly notarized, legally recorded with the county, and never challenged. Barry stared at the page. So, my parents never owned it. Melissa shook her head. They couldn't transfer ownership because they never had ownership. Barry lowered her eyes. They spent 6 years acting like landlords. And according to these records, Melissa said, tapping another folder, they collected rent from the legal owner. Within 48 hours, formal legal notices were delivered to the house on Willow Lane. Barry wasn't there. She didn't want the confrontation. A licensed process server knocked on the front door. Thomas answered. Mr. Carter. What is this? You've been served. Thomas glanced at the envelope. His expression hardened as he read the first page. Vacate the premises. He looked up in disbelief. This has to be some kind of joke. It is a court-authorized notice. Linda hurried into the hallway. What happened? Thomas handed her the paperwork. Her face drained of color. No. She shook her head. Barry wouldn't do this. The process server remained professional. The owner has initiated legal possession proceedings. Linda looked up sharply. We are the owners. The process server simply pointed to the documents. The court will determine that. Then he left. Barry's phone rang repeatedly that evening. She let every call go to voicemail. Thomas, Linda, Ethan, then another, then another. Finally, a text arrived. You are humiliating this family. Minutes later, another appeared. Call us immediately. Barry locked the phone and set it aside. For years, every difficult conversation had ended the same way. She apologized. She gave in. She paid. This time, her attorney had already told her exactly what to do. No direct conversations, Melissa had warned. Everything goes through my office. For the first time in her adult life, Barry followed someone else's advice instead of her parents'. The following week, Melissa called with another discovery. You need to come in. Barry arrived that afternoon. Melissa slid several enlarged bank records across the table. We subpoenaed additional financial records connected to the rent payments. Barry leaned forward. What did you find? The money wasn't being held for property expenses. Melissa pointed to multiple transfers. Most of your rent payments went directly into your parents' personal accounts. Vacation expenses, restaurant charges, a new SUV down payment, luxury furniture, weekend resort reservations. Barry slowly looked up. My rent. Melissa nodded. Helped fund their lifestyle. Barry stared silently at the statements. She remembered working late nights to cover another month's payment. Skipping vacations. Postponing replacing her own car. Saying no whenever friends invited her out because she had house bills. Meanwhile, her parents had been using that money for themselves. Melissa spoke gently. The financial records also strengthen your civil position if you ever choose to pursue reimbursement. Barry shook her head. I don't want revenge. What do you want? Barry answered without hesitation. My home back. News of the lawsuit spread quickly through the neighborhood. Former neighbors began reaching out. Mrs. Alvarez, who had lived across the street for over 20 years, asked if they could meet. They sat together on a park bench overlooking the community pond. I've wanted to tell you something for years, Mrs. Alvarez admitted. Barry frowned. What is it? Your grandmother used to tell everyone the house would belong to you someday. Barry looked up. She did. Mrs. Alvarez smiled sadly. She was proud of you. Then why didn't anyone ever tell me? We assumed you already knew. Another neighbor shared a similar memory. So did Mr. Jenkins. And the Hendersons. Every conversation painted the same picture. Outside the family, people believed Barry on the home. Inside the family, her parents had carefully controlled the narrative. They had convinced Barry she was fortunate to be allowed to stay. They had convinced relatives she was financially irresponsible. They had convinced Ethan he would someday inherit the property. The deception had only existed where they controlled the information. Barry finally understood how deliberate it had all been. The hearing date arrived. The courthouse hallway buzzed with quiet conversations. Barry stood beside Melissa, holding a single folder. Across the hall stood Linda, Thomas, and Ethan. Thomas glared at her. You still have time to stop this. Barry didn't answer. Linda stepped closer. We're your parents. Melissa immediately moved between them. My client has nothing to discuss outside the courtroom. The bailiff opened the doors. Case number 24, CV 1187. Everyone stood. The judge entered and took his seat. He accepted the case file from the clerk, opened the first certified document, and began reading in complete silence. Then he slowly lifted his eyes and looked directly at Linda and Thomas Carter. The courtroom remained completely silent as the judge continued reviewing the file. He read the recorded deed, then the notarized transfer documents, then the letter Barry's grandmother had left inside the safe deposit file. Finally, he examined the payment records attached to the attorney's evidence binder. He closed the folder. "Mrs. Grant," he said to Barry's attorney, "are these certified copies of the county records?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And the originals have been verified?" "They have." The judge nodded once before looking toward Linda and Thomas. "Do either of you dispute the authenticity of these documents?" Thomas rose immediately. "We raised that house." "That wasn't my question." Thomas hesitated. "We lived there for years." The judge remained patient. "I'm asking whether you dispute that the deed transferred ownership to Ms. Barry Carter 6 years ago." Thomas looked at his attorney. His attorney slowly stood. "No, Your Honor." The courtroom grew even quieter. "So ownership is not in dispute?" "No, Your Honor." The judge made a brief note. "Then the legal owner of the property before this court is Ms. Barry Carter." Barry lowered her eyes for a moment. It was the first time anyone in authority had spoken those words aloud. Barry's attorney stood. "Your Honor, we have also submitted financial records showing Ms. Carter paid the annual property taxes, homeowners insurance, major structural repairs, and monthly maintenance costs throughout the period in question." The judge flipped several pages. "I see those." Melissa continued. "In addition, Ms. Carter made monthly payments labeled as rent directly into Mr. and Mrs. Carter's personal bank accounts." The judge looked toward Thomas. "Were those payments accepted?" Thomas shifted uneasily. "She contributed to the household." The judge asked another question. "Did you ever disclose to your daughter that she was already the legal owner of the home?" Thomas remained silent. Linda looked down at the table. After several long seconds, Thomas quietly answered, "No." The judge nodded once. "So Ms. Carter believed she was paying rent to remain inside property that legally belonged to her?" "Yes." "And you allowed that belief to continue?" No one answered. The silence itself became the answer. The judge turned to the letter Barry's grandmother had written. He read several passages, silently before placing it back inside the folder. "The purpose of this letter is clear." He looked toward both parties. The grantor anticipated that Ms. Carter might one day need proof of ownership if someone attempted to deprive her of it. Barry felt tears sting her eyes. Her grandmother had seen the possibility years before anyone else. She had quietly prepared for the day Barry might need protection. The judge continued. "The evidence establishes 3 uncontested facts." He counted them carefully. "First, Ms. Barry Carter has been the sole legal owner of the residence since the deed was recorded. Second, she personally funded significant property expenses during that same period. Third, Mr. and Mrs. Carter accepted rent payments despite having no ownership interest in the property." He closed the file. "The court therefore grants possession to the legal owner." Barry's heart pounded. "The occupants are ordered to vacate the property in accordance with the statutory timeline." The gavel struck once. Judgment entered. Outside the courtroom, Linda hurried toward Barry. "Barry, please." Barry stopped but said nothing. Linda's voice trembled. "We're still your parents." Barry looked at her quietly. "I never stopped treating you like my parents." Linda swallowed. "You don't have to do this." "I didn't." Barry's answer came softly. "You did." Thomas walked over. "We made mistakes." Barry met his eyes. "You threw me out of my own house because I missed a rent payment." Neither of them had an answer. For years, Thomas always had one. Today, he looked away first. Melissa gently touched Barry's shoulder. "We should go." Barry nodded. Without another word, she walked down the courthouse steps. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like someone asking permission to exist. 3 weeks later, the moving trucks pulled away from Willow Lane. The house was finally quiet. Barry unlocked the front door herself. Not as a tenant. Not as a guest. As its rightful owner. She stepped inside slowly. The living room looked strangely empty after her parents' furniture had been removed. Dust floated through the afternoon sunlight. She stood there without speaking. Then she walked into the kitchen. She rested one hand on the old wooden counter where her grandmother used to roll pie dough every Thanksgiving morning. A memory surfaced so clearly she almost smiled. A home isn't measured by who controls it, asterisk her grandmother had once said. It's measured by who makes people feel safe inside it. Barry closed her eyes. For years, she had believed she was failing because she could never satisfy another rent payment. Now she understood the truth. The problem had never been her. It had been the lie. News spread quickly through the extended family. Relatives who had once believed Linda and Thomas's version of events began calling Barry. Her Aunt Carol arrived first. She stood on the porch holding a casserole dish. I owe you an apology. Barry opened the door wider. You don't owe me anything. I believed them. Carol's eyes filled with regret. I should have asked you what happened instead of assuming. Barry smiled gently. You're asking now. One by one, more relatives came. Some apologized. Others admitted they had repeated the story without ever questioning it. The truth changed more than ownership. It changed how people remembered the past. Family dinners. Arguments. Financial requests. Everything looked different once everyone knew who had really been paying the bills. Ethan tried contacting Barry several times. His messages became shorter each week. At first, he demanded she make things right. Then he insisted their parents deserved another chance. Eventually, he stopped arguing altogether. The realization had finally reached him. The house he believed would someday become his inheritance had never belonged to his parents. It had belonged to Barry from the beginning. The future he expected had been built on a lie he never questioned. Barry never pursued revenge. Although her attorney explained she could seek reimbursement for years of rent payments, Barry made a different choice. I've spent enough years letting that house define my pain, she said. I'd rather let it define my peace. Instead, she invested her time restoring it. She repaired worn hardwood floors, repainted every room, rehung family photographs her parents had boxed away. The smallest bedroom became a quiet reading room. On one shelf, she placed the brass safe deposit key inside a simple glass frame. Not because it unlocked a vault, because it unlocked the truth. The following Thanksgiving, the smell of cinnamon filled the kitchen once again. Friends, Aunt Carol, several cousins, neighbors who had known her grandmother. Everyone gathered around the same dining table where Barry had once believed she no longer belonged. No one demanded rent. No one questioned whether she deserved to be there. Before dinner, Barry quietly unfolded her grandmother's handwritten letter one last time. She smiled, folded it carefully, and placed it back inside its envelope. Then she looked around the room. This house had never been the greatest gift her grandmother left behind. The greatest gift was knowing that no amount of manipulation could erase the truth about where she belonged. Barry closed the front door that evening, turned the lock with her own key, and smiled. No one would ever make her pay to live in her own home again.